The emergency room at Riverside Community Hospital was quieter than usual for a Thursday afternoon. Sarah Mitchell stood at the nurse's station, updating patient charts with the same careful attention she brought to everything in her life. At 42 years old, she had the kind of steady presence that put anxious patients at ease. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her scrubs were spotless despite the long shift she'd already worked. She'd been a nurse at Riverside for 3 years now, ever since she'd left the Army and returned to her hometown of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The transition from military to civilian life hadn't been easy, but Sarah had learned long ago that she could handle difficult things. She'd handled a lot worse than paperwork and demanding patients. The automatic doors swished open, and Sarah glanced up out of habit. A man in an expensive suit strode through, his face tight with irritation. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair perfectly styled and shoes that probably cost more than Sarah made in a week. Everything about him screamed money and self-importance. Behind him, two other men followed. One wore a similar suit, though slightly less expensive. The other was clearly security, built like a linebacker and scanning the room with professional wariness. "I need to see someone in charge," the silver-haired man announced to no one in particular. His voice carried the tone of someone used to being obeyed immediately. "Now." Sarah set down her pen and approached the desk. "Sir, I can help you. Are you here about a patient?" The man barely glanced at her. "I said someone in charge. Is the director available?" "Mr. Patterson is in a meeting," Sarah replied calmly. She'd dealt with plenty of difficult people in her time. "I'm the senior nurse on duty, if you can tell me what you need." "I don't need a nurse," the man interrupted, his tone dismissive. "I need someone with actual authority. My name is Richard Thornton. I'm on the hospital board. Well, I was until this morning when I had the good sense to resign. Now I'm here to collect my mother's medical records before I transfer her to a facility that actually knows what it's doing." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I understand, Mr. Thornton. I can help you with that request. We'll need some paperwork completed and—" "Did you not hear me?" Thornton's voice rose. "I don't need a nurse to shuffle papers at me. Get me someone who can actually make decisions." The other nurse at the station, a young woman named Jessica, shot Sarah a sympathetic look. Sarah gave her a small nod. She'd handled worse than an entitled businessman having a bad day. "Sir, I assure you I'm qualified to help with records requests," Sarah said evenly. "If you'll just—" "Look," Thornton said, leaning on the desk and fixing her with a cold stare. "I'm sure you're very good at taking temperatures and fluffing pillows, but I need to speak with someone who has a brain in their head and the authority to get things done. Surely even you can understand that." The words stung, but Sarah's face didn't show it. Years of military discipline had taught her to control her reactions. "I understand you're frustrated about your mother's care. Let me page Mr. Patterson for you." "Finally," Thornton muttered. He turned to his companion. "See what I mean, James? This is exactly the kind of incompetence I've been talking about. They stick anyone in scrubs these days and call them medical professionals." Sarah reached for the phone, her jaw tight. She'd spent years in combat zones, had saved lives under fire, had earned the respect of soldiers who would have gladly followed her into hell. And now she was being dismissed like an incompetent child by a man who'd probably never faced a real challenge in his privileged life. But she didn't say any of that. She simply paged the director and waited. Mr. Patterson arrived 5 minutes later, slightly out of breath from hurrying. He was a kind man in his 60s who ran the hospital with genuine care for both staff and patients. "Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. Please, come to my office and we can discuss." "No need for your office," Thornton interrupted. "I just need my mother's files. I'm transferring her to Presbyterian in Pittsburgh, somewhere with actual standards." Patterson's face fell. "Mr. Thornton, your mother is receiving excellent care here. The incident you mentioned was—" The incident, Thornton said sharply, was your staff giving my mother the wrong medication. She could have died. And when I came here to address it, I was met by this nurse who couldn't seem to grasp that I needed actual help, not patronizing platitudes from someone whose biggest accomplishment is probably graduating from some 2-year community college program. Sarah felt her face flush, but she remained silent. Jessica looked horrified. Patterson opened his mouth to speak, but Thornton was on a roll. This is exactly what's wrong with healthcare in this country, he continued, warming to his subject. No standards anymore, no excellence, just mediocrity and scrubs going through the motions collecting a paycheck. Well, I won't have my mother subjected to it any longer. That's enough, Patterson said quietly, but with steel in his voice. Mr. Thornton, you're upset, and I understand. But Nurse Mitchell is one of the finest medical professionals I've ever had the privilege to work with. Your mother's medication error was caught immediately by Sarah herself, before any harm was done. And I'll remind you that the error was made by a temporary pharmacy tech who no longer works here. Thornton waved his hand dismissively. Whatever, I want the files. You'll have them by end of business today, Patterson said. Now I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. This is a hospital. Thornton smirked. Of course, wouldn't want to disturb the mediocre care being provided. He glanced at Sarah one more time, his eyes cold. Try to at least look professional, would you? That cheap tattoo on your wrist is showing. Very unprofessional. Sarah instinctively pulled her sleeve down, covering the small tattoo that was just barely visible. It was nothing elaborate, just a simple design, but it meant more to her than this man could possibly understand. Come on, James, Thornton said to his companion. Let's get out of here before the incompetence is contagious. They turned to leave, and that's when it happened. Sarah reached up to adjust her collar, and her sleeve pulled back further. The tattoo became fully visible, not just the small design Thornton had glimpsed, but the words beneath it. James, Thornton's companion, had been walking past when he caught sight of it. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening. Sarah didn't notice at first, but James moved closer, staring at her wrist. Sir, he said quietly to Thornton. Sir, wait. Thornton turned back, annoyed. What is it? James was still staring at Sarah's wrist. That tattoo, ma'am, is that a unit insignia? Sarah met his eyes, and something passed between them. A recognition. She pulled her sleeve back fully, revealing the complete tattoo. It was small but detailed, the distinctive insignia of the 230th Forward Surgical Team, with a small medic's cross beneath it. And below that, coordinates. Numbers that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who'd been there. Kandahar Province, James breathed, 2011. Sarah nodded slowly. You were there. Not in your unit, James said. His voice had changed completely, filled with something like awe. But I was. Jesus, you're that Mitchell, Captain Sarah Mitchell. Thornton looked between them, confused and irritated. James, what are you talking about? But James wasn't listening to his employer anymore. He was staring at Sarah with an expression of profound respect. Sir, he said to Thornton, his voice shaking slightly, this nurse you just insulted, she's a decorated combat veteran. She commanded a forward surgical team in Afghanistan. He trailed off, seemingly unable to find words. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She didn't like talking about those days. Didn't like the attention, the questions, the way people looked at her when they knew. I'm just a nurse now, she said quietly. Just a nurse, James repeated, and he actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. Ma'am, with all due respect, you saved over 300 lives in a combat zone. You operated in a tent under mortar fire. He turned to Thornton. Sir, you need to know who you just spoke to. Thornton's face had gone pale. For the first time since he'd walked in, he looked uncertain. I don't understand. That tattoo, James said, pointing to Sarah's wrist. Those coordinates. That's where the Firebase Python massacre happened, where the Taliban overran our position. 43 soldiers were killed or wounded that night. It would have been 100 if not for Captain Mitchell and her surgical team. They stayed at their post for 14 hours straight while the base was under attack, operating on our guys, keeping them alive until medevac could get through. The emergency room had gone completely silent. Every staff member was watching. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I had a team," she said softly. "It wasn't just me." "You were awarded the Bronze Star with Valor," James continued, ignoring her protest. He seemed to be reciting from memory. "And the Army Commendation Medal. You were recommended for the Silver Star, but you turned it down, said your medics deserved it more." Sarah's hands were trembling now. She clasped them together to hide it. "That's in the past." Thornton had gone from pale to red. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Sarah said, and for the first time there was an edge to her voice. "You didn't bother to ask. You saw a nurse and you assumed that meant I wasn't worth your time, that I was mediocre, that my biggest accomplishment was a community college degree." She paused, letting that sink in. "For the record, I have a master's degree in nursing from Johns Hopkins. I completed it while on active duty. And yes, I started at community college, because that's all my family could afford." The words hung in the air. Thornton opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I apologize," he finally managed. I was out of line." Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. This wasn't who she was. She didn't lose her temper. She didn't let people get to her. "Your mother's records will be ready this afternoon, Mr. Thornton. Is there anything else I can help you with?" The dismissal in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Thornton shook his head, looking smaller somehow than when he'd walked in. "No, thank you, and I'm truly sorry." He turned and walked out, moving quickly, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. James lingered for a moment. "Captain Mitchell," he said quietly, "it's an honor, truly." "Just Sarah now," she replied, "just a nurse." "No," James said firmly. "You'll never be just anything. Thank you for your service." He followed Thornton out, leaving Sarah standing at the nurse's station, feeling like she'd just run a marathon. The other staff members were staring at her with new eyes. Jessica looked like she might cry. "Sarah," Patterson said gently, "take your break, please." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked quickly toward the break room. Once inside, with the door closed behind her, she finally let herself lean against the wall and breathe. She'd left that life behind. Come home to Millbrook specifically to get away from being Captain Mitchell, the decorated war hero. She'd wanted to be just Sarah again, just a nurse, helping people in a quiet town where nobody knew about Firebase Python or the 14 hours of hell she'd lived through. But the past never stayed buried, did it? It always found a way to surface, whether you wanted it to or not. Sarah didn't go home after her shift ended. Instead, she drove to the small park on the edge of town, the one that overlooked Miller's Creek. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and she sat on a bench watching the water flow past, trying to quiet the storm in her mind. She hadn't thought about Firebase Python in months, had worked hard not to think about it, actually. The therapy had helped, and the distance from military life had helped even more. But James, recognizing her unit tattoo, had ripped open old wounds she'd thought were healed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patterson, "Are you okay? Take tomorrow off if you need it." Sarah typed back, "I'm fine, see you tomorrow." But she wasn't fine. Her hands were still shaking slightly, and she could feel the familiar tightness in her chest that meant she was close to a panic attack. She focused on her breathing, using the techniques her therapist had taught her. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. "Thought I might find you here." Sarah's head snapped up. A woman was walking toward her, silhouetted against the sunset. As she got closer, Sarah recognized her immediately. Dr. Linda Chen, one of the ER physicians at Riverside. She was in her late 30s, brilliant and kind, and one of the few people at the hospital Sarah considered a real friend. "How did you know I'd be here?" Sarah asked. "You mentioned once that you come here when you need to think," Linda said, settling onto the bench beside her. "Jessica told me what happened with Thornton. I'm sorry I wasn't there." Sarah shrugged. "It's fine," he apologized. "Only because he found out who you really are," Linda said quietly. "That doesn't make what he said okay." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it doesn't matter, I've heard worse." Linda was quiet for a moment, watching the creek. "You never talk about your time in the service." "There's nothing to say." "Sarah," Linda's voice was gentle but firm. "Jessica said that man James mentioned Firebase Python. I looked it up. I saw the news reports from back then." She paused. "You operated for 14 hours straight while your base was being attacked. Your surgical tent took direct fire. 3 of your medics were wounded, but you kept going. You saved over 300 soldiers." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I did my job." "You did more than your job," Linda said. "And then you came back home and became a civilian nurse, and you never told anyone. Why?" It was a fair question. Sarah had asked herself the same thing many times. "Because that's not who I am anymore. I'm not Captain Mitchell, war hero. I'm just Sarah. I take care of sick people in a small-town hospital. I go home to my apartment and watch TV and live a normal, quiet life. That's all I want." "Is it though?" Linda asked softly. "Because from where I'm sitting it looks like you're hiding." The words stung because they were true. Sarah had been hiding, she knew that. Hiding from the memories, from the nightmares, from the weight of all those lives she'd saved and the ones she couldn't. From the faces of the boys, and they had been boys, most of them barely 20, who had died on her operating table despite everything she'd done. "I can't go back to that," Sarah whispered. "I can't be that person again. It costs too much." Linda reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to be, but you also don't have to pretend that part of your life didn't happen. It's okay to be proud of what you did. It's okay to let people know." Sarah pulled her hand away, standing up from the bench. "I need to go home." "Sarah." "I'm fine, Linda, really. I just need some rest." She walked back to her car before Linda could argue further. The drive home was a blur. She lived in a small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street, and she climbed the stairs slowly, feeling every one of her 42 years. Inside, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. Her wrist still showed the tattoo, the one Thornton had called unprofessional. She'd gotten it the day she left active duty, as a way to carry her team with her. The coordinates marked the exact location of the surgical tent at Firebase Python. Below the numbers were 3 small stars, one for each of the medics who'd been wounded that night. They'd all survived, thankfully, but it had been close. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Captain Mitchell." The voice was male, unfamiliar. "This is Sarah Mitchell. Who's calling?" "Ma'am, my name is David Reeves. I'm a reporter with the Pittsburgh Tribune. I heard about what happened at Riverside Hospital today, and I'd like to talk to you about your service record. I think our readers would be very interested in." Sarah hung up. Her heart was pounding. How had a reporter already heard about this? It had only been a few hours. The phone rang again. Same number. She declined the call and blocked it. Then another call came through. Different number. She let it go to voicemail. Within an hour, she'd received 7 more calls from various numbers, and her email inbox was filling up with interview requests. Somehow, word had gotten out. Sarah Mitchell, the decorated combat nurse who'd been working anonymously at a small-town hospital, had been discovered. She felt trapped. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, what she'd been trying to avoid. She didn't want to be a story, didn't want to be interviewed or praised or held up as some kind of hero. She just wanted to be left alone. At 10 p.m. there was a knock on her door. Sarah froze. The reporters had found her address. She crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. It wasn't a reporter. It was James, Thornton's security man from earlier, standing in the hallway looking uncomfortable. Sarah debated not answering, but curiosity got the better of her. She opened the door but left the chain on. "What do you want?" "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to bother you at home," James said quickly. I needed to talk to you, to apologize. What happened today, it's my fault. I shouldn't have said anything about your service. I got excited and I didn't think, and now there are reporters calling Mr. Thornton's office and your hospital and probably you, and I'm so sorry." Sarah studied him through the gap in the door. He looked genuinely distressed. "You served?" "Yes, ma'am. Army like you. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. I wasn't at Python, but I was at Firebase Tillman when it got hit in 2012. I know what it's like over there. I know what you went through." He paused. "When I saw your tattoo, when I realized who you were, Captain, the guys in my unit used to talk about you, about Python, about how you and your team held the line. You were a legend." "I'm not a legend," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just someone who did her job." "You're more than that," James insisted. "And I'm sorry I put you in the spotlight. I should have kept my mouth shut." Sarah sighed and closed the door to remove the chain, then opened it fully. "Come in. You look like you need to sit down." James followed her inside, looking around the small apartment. It was simply furnished, neat and clean, with very little personal decoration. No photos on the walls, no military memorabilia. Nothing that would indicate the life Sarah had lived before. "Can I ask you something?" James said as he sat down in the chair she offered. "You can ask." "Why did you leave? I mean, you were on track for promotion. You could have made major, maybe even lieutenant colonel eventually. Why come back to a small town and work as a civilian nurse?" It was the question Sarah had avoided for 3 years. Even her therapist had stopped asking after a while. But something about this man, this fellow veteran who understood at least part of what she'd been through, made her want to answer honestly. "Because I was broken," she said simply. "Python broke something in me. I kept working, kept serving, but every surgery after that night all I could see were the soldiers I'd lost. Every time we got casualties, I was back in that tent with the mortars falling and the screams and the blood." She paused, her voice dropping. "I started making mistakes. Small ones at first, but they were getting worse. I could feel it. And I knew that if I didn't stop, if I didn't get out, I was going to get someone killed." James nodded slowly. "I get that, I really do." "So I resigned my commission," Sarah continued. "Came home to Millbrook where I grew up, started over as a civilian, went to therapy, learned to live with the nightmares." She looked directly at him. "And I tried very hard to leave Captain Mitchell behind, to just be Sarah, the nurse, someone normal, someone who doesn't have to carry the weight of 300 lives saved and 17 lost." "17," James repeated softly. "I didn't know the number who didn't make it." 17 soldiers died on my table that night," Sarah said. "I remember every single face, every single name. Timothy Flores was 19. Kevin Washington was 22. Amanda Chen was 23 and engaged to be married." Her voice cracked slightly. "I can name all 17. I see them in my dreams." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, James spoke. "For what it's worth, Captain, those 17 would have died immediately without you there, along with hundreds of others. You gave them a chance. That's all anyone could ask for." Sarah didn't respond. She'd heard similar words from her therapist, from her commanding officers, from fellow soldiers. It didn't make the weight any lighter. "I should go," James said, standing up. "But I want you to know, if there's anything I can do to help with the reporter situation, just ask. I'll do whatever I can." After he left, Sarah sat in the dark apartment, thinking. The past was catching up with her whether she wanted it to or not. Tomorrow, she'd have to face the hospital, face the questions, face the attention she'd spent 3 years avoiding. She pulled out her phone and looked at the blocked numbers, the voicemails she hadn't listened to. There were so many. Then she saw one email that stood out from the rest. The subject line read, From a grateful father. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Dear Captain Mitchell, my name is Robert Flores. You don't know me, but you knew my son Timothy. He was one of the soldiers you treated at Firebase Python. He didn't survive, but I wanted you to know that the Army sent me his personal effects, and among them was a letter he'd written to me the day before the attack. In it, he talked about you, about how you treated a minor injury he had a week earlier and how kind you were, how you made him feel safe. When we got the news that he'd died, they told us you'd been with him at the end, that he wasn't alone. I've spent the last 13 years wanting to thank you for that, for being there, for trying, for caring. Today I heard your name on the news and I finally found you. So thank you, Captain Mitchell. Thank you for giving my son comfort in his final moments. You'll never know what that means to a father's heart. Sarah read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't known Timothy Flores had written about her, hadn't known that her presence had mattered to him, even at the end. Maybe, she thought, maybe hiding from the past wasn't the answer. Maybe it was time to stop running. The next morning, Sarah woke early, her eyes gritty from crying and lack of sleep. She'd spent half the night reading through the emails that had poured in, not the reporters. She'd deleted those without reading, but the others. The ones from veterans who'd been at Firebase Python. The ones from families of soldiers she'd treated. The ones from people who just wanted to say thank you. There were dozens of them. Stories she'd never heard, about lives she'd saved and barely remembered. A young man who was now a doctor himself, inspired by the care she'd given him. A woman who'd lost her legs in the attack but survived because of Sarah's quick thinking. A father who wanted her to know that his daughter's last words had been about the nurse who held her hand. Each one was a piece of a story Sarah had never let herself consider. She'd been so focused on the 17 she'd lost that she'd never really thought about the hundreds she'd saved. About what those lives meant, not just in the moment, but in all the years after. When her alarm went off at 6 a.m., she was already dressed and sitting at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside her. She'd made a decision sometime during the night. She couldn't keep hiding. It wasn't fair to the people who wanted to thank her, and it wasn't fair to herself. She picked up her phone and called Patterson. "Sarah," he sounded worried. "Are you all right? I've been getting calls all morning from reporters asking about you." "I know," Sarah said. "I've been getting them too. Listen, I need to talk to you. Can I come in early?" "Of course, I'm already here." The hospital was just waking up when Sarah arrived. The morning shift was coming on, bleary-eyed nurses grabbing coffee and checking the overnight reports. Sarah went straight to Patterson's office. He looked tired, but his eyes were kind as always. "Sit down, please. Can I get you anything?" "I'm fine," Sarah said. She sat across from his desk, her hands clasped in her lap. "I want to apologize for yesterday, for not handling the situation with Thornton better." Patterson held up a hand. "Sarah, you handled it perfectly, better than I would have. He was completely out of line." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but I should have stayed calmer, and I should have told you about my military background when you hired me. I wanted to leave that behind." "I understand," Patterson said gently, "more than you might think. My brother was in Vietnam. When he came back, he wanted nothing to do with the military, wouldn't even talk about it. I get why you kept it private." Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding. "But now it's not private anymore, and I've been thinking about what to do about that." She took a deep breath. "There's a reporter, David Reeves from the Pittsburgh Tribune. He's been calling. I'd like to talk to him. Do one interview, tell my story on my own terms, and then hopefully everyone will leave me alone." Patterson studied her carefully. "Are you sure? You don't owe anyone your story." "I know," Sarah said, "but I got an email last night from the father of one of the soldiers I treated, one who didn't make it, and reading his words, I realized that maybe my story isn't just mine. Maybe it belongs to all those soldiers and their families too. Maybe they deserve to hear it." "All right," Patterson said. If you're sure, I'll help however I can. We can do the interview here at the hospital if you want. Show people what you do now. Thank you, Sarah said. That would be good. The interview was scheduled for that afternoon. David Reeves turned out to be a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He set up in one of the hospital's conference rooms, and Sarah sat across from him, her hands steady now, her decision made. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me, Captain Mitchell, Reeves began. It's just Sarah now, she corrected. I'm not a captain anymore. Fair enough, Reeves said with a smile. Sarah, can you tell me about that night at Firebase Python, what you remember? And so Sarah talked. For the first time in years, she let herself really remember. She described the first mortar round hitting, the chaos that followed, the decision to keep operating despite the danger. She talked about her team, Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporal Johnson, and Private First Class Davis, and how they'd worked together seamlessly despite the hell raining down around them. She talked about the soldiers they'd saved, performing surgery after surgery in a tent that shook with each explosion. She talked about the young man who'd needed an emergency amputation, and how she'd held his hand afterward and promised him he'd be okay. She talked about the woman who'd coded 3 times on the table, and how Rodriguez had manually compressed her heart for 20 minutes while Sarah repaired the damage to her chest. And yes, she talked about the ones they'd lost, about Timothy Flores and the others, about how each death felt like a personal failure, even though rationally she knew she'd done everything possible. I carried a lot of guilt, she admitted to Reeves. For a long time, I focused only on the ones I couldn't save. It felt wrong to take pride in the ones who lived when 17 families were planning funerals. But you've started to see it differently, Reeves prompted gently. Sarah thought about the emails she'd read about Robert Flores's words of gratitude. I'm trying to. A wise friend told me yesterday that I don't have to be Captain Mitchell anymore, but I also don't have to pretend that part of my life didn't happen. I'm learning that both things can be true. I can be Sarah the nurse, and I can also be the person who served at Firebase Python. They're both part of who I am. The interview went on for over an hour. Reeves asked thoughtful questions, and Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She talked about her transition to civilian life, about why she'd chosen to come back to her hometown, about finding purpose in everyday nursing care. What would you say to Richard Thornton if he were here? Reeves asked toward the end. Sarah considered the question. I'd say that everyone you meet is carrying a story you don't know. Everyone has depth and experiences and value that might not be immediately visible. Before you dismiss someone, before you assume they're mediocre or incompetent, take a moment to consider what you might be missing. Treat people with respect, not because of what they've done or who they are, but because they're human beings who deserve it. When the interview finished, Sarah felt lighter somehow, exhausted but lighter. She'd told her story and the sky hadn't fallen. The past hadn't swallowed her whole. She was still standing. Reeves stood and shook her hand. Thank you, Sarah. This will run in Sunday's paper. I think it's going to touch a lot of people. That evening, Sarah was back at the nurse's station when she got a visitor. Richard Thornton walked through the emergency room doors, but this time there was no entourage, no arrogance. He looked smaller, humbler. Ms. Mitchell, he said quietly, do you have a moment? Sarah gestured to the chairs in the waiting area. What can I do for you, Mr. Thornton? He sat down heavily, looking at his hands. I wanted to apologize again, properly this time. What I said yesterday was inexcusable. I was angry about my mother's situation, but that's no excuse for how I treated you. I accept your apology, Sarah said simply. Thornton looked up at her. I called James last night, asked him to tell me everything he knew about what happened at Firebase Python. He did, and then I stayed up reading every article I could find about it. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. My son is in the army. He's deployed right now in the Middle East, and I realized that if something happened to him, I'd want someone like you there, someone who'd fight for him the way you fought for those soldiers. Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I hope he stays safe." "Thank you," Thornton said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's not much, but I've made a donation to the hospital in your name for the emergency department. Equipment, training, whatever you need. It's the least I can do." Sarah opened the envelope and nearly dropped it. The check was for $50,000. "Mr. Thornton, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," he interrupted. "And please call me Richard. I'm also reinstating my position on the hospital board. Mr. Patterson and I spoke this morning. I want to help make sure this hospital has the resources it needs to provide excellent care. The kind of care you provide every single day." Sarah didn't know what to say. She looked at the check, then at Richard Thornton, this man who had dismissed her so completely just 24 hours ago. "Thank you," she finally managed. "This will make a real difference." After Thornton left, Sarah sat for a moment, thinking about how quickly things could change. How one moment you could be invisible and dismissed, and the next, seen and valued. It wasn't really about the recognition, she realized. It was about being acknowledged as a full person with depth and experience and worth. Linda Chen found her a few minutes later. "I heard Richard Thornton was here. Everything okay?" "More than okay," Sarah said, showing her the check. "He apologized, really apologized, and made this donation." Linda whistled. "Wow, that's quite a turnaround." She paused. "I also heard you did an interview today. How did it go?" "It was good," Sarah said, and she meant it. "Hard, but good. I feel like I finally stopped running from my past." "Good," Linda said warmly. "Because your past is nothing to run from. It's something to be proud of." Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'm starting to believe that." That night as Sarah drove home, she felt different, settled somehow, like a piece of herself that had been missing had finally clicked back into place. She wasn't just Sarah the nurse anymore, trying desperately to forget Captain Mitchell. She was both. She was all of her experiences, all of her scars, all of her strengths. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly who she was supposed to be. Part 4, Full Circle. The article ran in the Pittsburgh Tribune that Sunday, spread across the front page with the headline, "The Hero Next Door. Combat Nurse's Quiet Service Continues at Home." The photo showed Sarah in her scrubs at Riverside Hospital, a small smile on her face, her unit tattoo visible on her wrist. Sarah's phone started ringing before she even finished her morning coffee. But this time, she answered some of the calls. Veterans who wanted to share their stories. Families who wanted to express gratitude. A few reporters, yes, but also hospital administrators who wanted to talk about her experience, nursing students who wanted advice, and military organizations who wanted to honor her service. It was overwhelming, but in a different way than she'd feared. People weren't trying to make her into something she wasn't. They just wanted to acknowledge what she'd done, what she continued to do. On Monday morning, Sarah walked into Riverside Hospital to find the staff gathered in the emergency department. Someone had hung a banner. "Thank you for your service, Sarah." Her eyes stung with tears as her colleagues applauded. Patterson stepped forward, smiling. "We wanted you to know how proud we are to work with you, not because you're a war hero, though you are, but because you're an exceptional nurse and an exceptional person." "Thank you," Sarah managed. "All of you. This place, this work, it saved me just as much as I might have saved anyone else. You're my family now." The days that followed brought more changes. The local VFW post invited Sarah to speak at their next meeting. A high school asked if she'd come talk to students considering military service. The State Nursing Association wanted to feature her in their newsletter. Sarah said yes to some requests and no to others, learning to set boundaries while also embracing this new chapter of her life. She was finding a balance, a way to honor her past without being consumed by it. 2 weeks after the article ran, Sarah got a call from an unfamiliar number. This time she answered. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was female, young, uncertain. Yes, who's calling? My name is Emily Chen. I was Amanda Chen's little sister. Sarah's heart stopped. Amanda Chen, 23 years old, engaged to be married. One of the 17 who hadn't made it off her table at Firebase Python. I'm so sorry for your loss, Sarah said quietly. Your sister was very brave. I know, Emily said. I was only 12 when she died, but I remember her talking about joining the army, about wanting to serve. And I remember how devastated our family was when we got the news. She paused. I read the article about you, about Firebase Python. I wanted to call and tell you something. What's that? Sarah asked, bracing herself. Thank you, Emily said simply, for being with her, for trying. My parents never really talked about the details of what happened that night, but I found some letters from the army in our attic last year. One of them mentioned you specifically. It said that Captain Sarah Mitchell stayed with Amanda until the end, that she wasn't alone. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She remembered Amanda Chen vividly, remembered holding her hand, whispering reassurances even when she knew it was hopeless, remembered the young woman's last words, "Tell my family I love them." She wasn't alone, Sarah confirmed, her voice breaking. And she wanted you to know she loved you, all of you. Those were her last words. Emily was crying now too. Thank you for telling me that, and thank you for caring about her, for caring about all of them. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her apartment for a long time, letting the tears fall. But these weren't the same tears she'd cried for years. These weren't tears of guilt or shame or failure. These were tears of release, of healing, of acceptance. She'd done everything she could. She'd given everything she had. And while she couldn't save everyone, she'd saved so many. She'd made a difference. That had to be enough. The following Saturday, Sarah was working the day shift when a commotion at the entrance caught her attention. A group of people in military dress uniforms was walking through the doors, led by a man in his 60s wearing the stars of a brigadier general. Sarah froze. She recognized him immediately, General Marcus Webb, who had been the commander of her field hospital unit in Afghanistan. He'd been a colonel back then, her direct superior officer. Captain Mitchell, he said, approaching her with a smile. Or should I say Ms. Mitchell now? Sir, Sarah said automatically, years of military training kicking in. What are you doing here? I came to correct an old mistake, Webb said. He gestured to the others with him, 2 officers and a woman in civilian clothes carrying a wooden presentation box. Is there somewhere we can talk? Somewhere private? Patterson appeared, looking curious and slightly overwhelmed. You can use the conference room. This way, please. Once they were all settled in the conference room, Webb opened the wooden box. Inside, Sarah saw the distinctive blue ribbon and star-shaped medal of the Silver Star. No, Sarah said immediately, standing up. Sir, with respect, I turned this down 13 years ago. I don't want it. I know you did, Webb said calmly. You said your medics deserved recognition more than you did. And you were right, they did deserve it. Which is why Rodriguez, Johnson, and Davis all received Bronze Stars with Valor shortly after you declined yours. But that doesn't mean you didn't deserve recognition too. Sir? Sarah, Webb interrupted gently, using her first name. You were recommended for the Silver Star for your actions on the night of the Firebase Python attack. You operated under direct enemy fire for 14 hours. You saved over 300 lives. 3 members of your team were wounded, and you continued working. When Rodriguez was hit, you treated him yourself between surgeries. When the mortar rounds got so close that the other surgical teams evacuated, you refused to leave your patients. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. You embodied the finest traditions of military service that night, and you've spent 13 years thinking you didn't do enough. I'm here to tell you that you did more than enough. You did everything. 17 soldiers died on my table, Sarah whispered. 300 lived, Webb countered. Because of you, Because of your skill, your courage, and your refusal to give up. Those 17 deaths aren't your failure, Sarah. They're the war's failure. But those 300 lives, those are your triumph. Sarah felt something break loose inside her chest. The weight she'd been carrying for so long, the guilt and the shame and the feeling that she'd never done enough, it began to lift. Webb stood and removed the silver star from its box. Sarah Mitchell, on behalf of the President of the United States and the United States Army, I'm proud to present you with the Silver Star for gallantry in action. He pinned the medal to her scrubs just above her heart. Thank you for your service, and thank you for continuing to serve even now. The small gathering in the conference room applauded. Through the window, Sarah could see that word had spread through the hospital. Staff members were gathered outside, watching. Patterson was wiping his eyes. After the ceremony, after photos were taken and hands were shaken and the officers departed, Sarah found herself alone in the conference room. She looked down at the metal pin to her chest, this symbol of recognition she'd avoided for so long. Linda Chen poked her head in. Hey, you okay? Sarah looked up, and to her surprise she was smiling. Yeah, I think I actually am. Good, Linda said, because there's someone here to see you, says it's important. Sarah followed Linda out to the waiting room, where she found James standing nervously, still in his security uniform. James, Sarah said, what's going on? I wanted to tell you something, James said. He looked uncomfortable but determined. After what happened with Mr. Thornton, after I saw how you handled everything, I've been doing some thinking. I've been working security for 5 years now, ever since I got out. Good job, decent pay, but… He trailed off. It's not what I'm meant to do. I was a medic in the Army, did you know that? Sarah shook her head. I was, James continued, and I was good at it, but when I came home I didn't think I could handle medical work anymore. Too many memories, so I took the easy route, got a security job, buried myself in it. He took a deep breath. But watching you, seeing how you came back from what you went through and kept serving, kept caring for people, it made me realize I've been hiding too. So I enrolled in nursing school. Start classes next month. Sarah felt her heart swell. James, that's wonderful. It's scary as hell, he admitted with a laugh. But it feels right, like I'm finally coming home to who I'm supposed to be. He paused. I wanted to thank you for showing me it's possible, for being brave enough to face your past and keep moving forward. You're going to be an excellent nurse, Sarah said warmly. If you ever need advice or help with your studies, you know where to find me. After James left, Sarah returned to work, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about journeys and healing, about how sometimes you had to go backward to move forward, about how facing the past didn't mean being consumed by it. It meant integrating it, making peace with it, letting it be part of your story without letting it define your whole story. That evening, as her shift ended, Sarah stood at the nurse's station one last time, looking around the emergency department. This place had been her refuge, her hiding spot, her sanctuary. But it could be more than that now. It could be a place where she not only healed others but continued healing herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Captain Mitchell, this is Robert Flores. I saw the news about your Silver Star. Congratulations. Timothy would have been so proud. Thank you again for everything. Sarah typed back, thank you for reaching out. Your words meant more to me than you'll ever know. Timothy was a brave young man, and I was honored to know him, even briefly. She hit send and then pulled up her contacts. She scrolled to her therapist's number she hadn't called in 6 months and typed a message. Hi, Dr. Williams. I know it's been a while, but I'd like to schedule an appointment. Some things have happened and I'd like to talk through them. Good things this time. The reply came quickly. Sarah, I'd be delighted. How about Wednesday at 4? Perfect. Sarah sent back, see you then. She gathered her things and headed for the exit. As she pushed through the doors into the cool evening air, she noticed the small memorial garden beside the hospital entrance. She'd walked past it hundreds of times but never really stopped to look at it. Now she did. It was a simple space with a few benches, some flowers, and a stone monument engraved with words from Florence Nightingale. Were there none who were discontented with what they have? The world would never reach anything better. Sarah sat on one of the benches, looking at those words. She'd been discontented for so long, restless and guilty, and unable to settle. But maybe discontent didn't have to be destructive. Maybe it could be the thing that pushed you to grow, to change, to become more than you were. She thought about the girl she'd been when she joined the army at 22, full of idealism and determination. She thought about the captain she'd been at Firebase Python, pushed beyond her limits but refusing to break. She thought about the woman she'd been for the past 3 years, hiding from her past and trying to become invisible. And she thought about who she was now, sitting here with a silver star pinned to her scrubs, no longer running, no longer hiding. Just Sarah. Just a nurse. Just a woman who'd seen hell and come back from it and chosen to keep serving anyway. Her phone rang one more time. She looked at the screen and smiled. It was Patterson. "Hey," she answered. "Sarah, I just got a call from the nursing school at the University of Pittsburgh," he said, excitement in his voice. "They want to know if you'd be willing to teach a class on trauma nursing. Just 1 or 2 sessions a semester, sharing your experience." 3 weeks ago, Sarah would have said no without hesitation. But now she considered it. Teaching meant talking about Firebase Python. It meant being open about her experiences, her mistakes, her triumphs. It meant being vulnerable. It meant being whole. "Yes," she said, "tell them yes." "Really?" Patterson sounded surprised and delighted. "Really," Sarah confirmed. "It's time, past time actually." After she hung up, Sarah sat in the memorial garden a while longer, watching the sun set over Millbrook. This small town that had seemed like an escape had become something else, a home, a place where she could be both who she'd been and who she was becoming. She touched the medal on her chest, then the tattoo on her wrist. Both were part of her story now. Both were pieces of a larger whole. Tomorrow she'd come back to work and take care of patients. She'd answer emails from veterans and families. She'd start preparing for her teaching session. She'd keep moving forward, one day at a time, one patient at a time, one moment at a time. But tonight she was just going to sit here in the quiet and breathe and let herself feel proud. Proud of what she'd survived. Proud of what she'd accomplished. Proud of who she'd been and who she was becoming. She wasn't just Sarah the nurse, trying to forget Captain Mitchell. She wasn't just Captain Mitchell, the decorated war hero. She was both, she was whole, she was home. And finally, after 13 long years, that was enough. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a classroom of nursing students at the University of Pittsburgh, her silver star displayed in a shadow box on the wall behind her. Trauma nursing isn't just about technical skills, she told them. It's about presence. It's about being willing to stand in the hardest moments with people who are suffering and saying, "I'm here, I won't leave you." Sometimes you can save them. Sometimes you can't, but you can always be present. You can always care. And sometimes that's enough. In the back of the classroom, James sat taking notes, his face serious and focused. He'd completed his first semester with honors and had discovered a particular aptitude for emergency medicine. After class, a young woman approached Sarah nervously. "Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. My brother is deployed right now, and hearing your story, knowing that there are people like you over there, it helps." Sarah smiled and squeezed the girl's hand. "They're in good hands, and when he comes home, you tell him that there are people here who understand, who have been where he's been. He doesn't have to carry it alone." That evening, Sarah met Linda for dinner at the small Italian restaurant on Main Street. Over pasta and wine, they talked about work and life and the future. "You seem different," Linda observed. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," Sarah admitted. It's like I've been carrying this huge weight for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. And now, she trailed off, searching for words. Now I'm remembering. I'm proud of you, Linda said quietly, for facing everything, for not running anymore. I'm proud of me too, Sarah said, and she meant it. Later that night, Sarah sat in her apartment writing an email. It was to the 17 families, the ones whose sons and daughters hadn't made it off her table at Firebase Python. She'd been putting it off for months, afraid of their anger or blame. But she'd finally realized that she needed to reach out, to tell them what she remembered about their loved ones, to offer whatever comfort or closure she could. The words came slowly, carefully, honestly. She wrote about their bravery and their sacrifice. She wrote about her own guilt and grief. She wrote about healing and forgiveness and the long road back from war. When she finished, she hit send on all 17 emails and then sat back, exhausted but peaceful. Her phone buzzed almost immediately, an email response from one of the families. With shaking hands, she opened it. Dear Sarah, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for remembering our son. Thank you for being with him. You gave us a gift we didn't know we needed, the knowledge that he wasn't alone, that someone cared, that his last moments mattered. We could never blame you. You're a hero and we're grateful beyond words. Sarah cried, but they were good tears, healing tears. She thought about Richard Thornton, who had dismissed her so completely, and then, through his arrogance, had inadvertently set her on this path toward healing. She thought about James and Emily Chen and Robert Flores and all the others whose lives had intersected with hers. And she thought about herself, the scared young captain who'd faced hell at Firebase Python, the broken veteran who'd come home and tried to hide, and the woman she was now, finally whole, finally home, finally at peace with all the pieces of herself. She picked up her phone one last time and sent a text to Patterson. Thank you for taking a chance on me 3 years ago, for giving me a place to heal, for seeing me even when I was trying to be invisible. His response came quickly. Thank you for showing all of us what true service looks like. We're lucky to have you. Sarah smiled and set down her phone. Tomorrow she'd go back to work, back to teaching, back to the life she was building piece by piece. But tonight, she was going to do something she hadn't done in 13 years. She was going to sleep peacefully, without nightmares, without guilt, without the weight of the past crushing her chest. Tonight she was going to rest. Because she'd finally learned what her therapist had been trying to tell her all along. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't have to save everyone to matter. You just have to show up, do your best, and be willing to keep trying.